The question exploding through royal circles right now is not whether Prince Harry is facing criticism. The question is whether the biggest crisis of his post-royal life has finally reached the point where it can no longer be contained. Because what began as uncomfortable allegations has now evolved into something far more dangerous, a growing narrative that every major charitable organization connected to Harry's name is being pulled into controversy at the same time. And when multiple fires start burning around the same person, people stop asking whether there is smoke. They start asking where the fire began. For years, Harry carefully built an image as the compassionate prince, the humanitarian rebel, the royal who walked away from palace walls to make a difference on his own terms. But now, that image is facing one of its toughest tests yet, and the timing could not be worse. The storm now surrounding African parks has become impossible to ignore. Reports emerging in major British publications have placed renewed attention on the conservation charity, where Harry served as president for years and remains a board member. At the center of the controversy are deeply disturbing allegations involving the Baka people, an indigenous community living around protected lands in the Republic of the Congo. Allegations that include violence, abuse, forced removals, and treatment that critics describe as shocking and inhumane. What makes this story even more explosive is that these accusations are not brand new. They have been circulating for years, gathering momentum, attracting investigations, and generating headlines that refuse to disappear. And suddenly, the questions are becoming louder. If serious concerns have existed for this long, why does Harry remain attached to the organization? Why are critics still demanding answers? And perhaps most importantly, why does every response seem to create even more questions? Survival International, a respected indigenous rights organization, has intensified pressure by claiming that problems continue despite previous investigations and promises of reform. Their statements have transformed what might have been viewed as a closed chapter into an ongoing scandal. According to those raising concerns, this isn't simply a historical issue. They argue that the consequences are still unfolding, and that changes everything. What makes this crisis particularly dangerous is the contrast between public appearances and public perception. While headlines discussing allegations continue circulating internationally, Harry recently appeared at a major African Parks fundraising event attended by wealthy donors and influential supporters. On one side of the story, cameras captured speeches, fundraising efforts, and ambitious conservation goals. On the other side, critics pointed toward unresolved questions and demanded accountability. The contrast was impossible to miss. For supporters, it demonstrated commitment to a cause. For critics, it looked like business as usual, while controversy remained unresolved. And this is where the situation becomes extraordinarily complicated. Nobody credible is claiming that Harry personally committed any abuse. No evidence suggests he directed, authorized, or participated in any wrongdoing. Even critics acknowledge that distinction. But that does not automatically end the conversation, because the debate has shifted from personal guilt to responsibility, and responsibility is a much harder issue to escape. Board members of major organizations are expected to provide oversight. They are expected to ask difficult questions. They are expected to ensure that values promoted publicly are reflected in actions taken privately. When allegations become this serious, people naturally begin examining everyone associated with the organization. The real problem for Harry may not be the allegations themselves. It may be the perception that his response has been too quiet, too cautious, too distant. Critics argue that referring reporters back to older statements does not answer newer questions. They believe the situation requires direct engagement, visible leadership, and public acknowledgement of concerns that continue generating headlines. Whether that criticism is fair or unfair almost becomes irrelevant once enough people start believing it, because perception has always been one of the most powerful forces in public life, and perception is becoming increasingly difficult to control. The pressure intensifies when viewed alongside a broader pattern emerging around Harry's charitable ventures. Suddenly, commentators are connecting dots that may once have seemed unrelated. African Parks faces scrutiny. Centabell faces internal conflict. Archewell has faced operational questions. Invictus continues battling concerns about finances and future planning. 4 organizations, 4 separate challenges, 4 different controversies. Yet critics increasingly point to a single common denominator: Harry's name. Fairly or unfairly, that connection is becoming impossible to avoid. And perhaps that is the most alarming development of all, because this story is no longer confined to one charity, one allegation, or one organization. It is evolving into a larger question about leadership, oversight, judgment, and the challenges Harry has faced since stepping away from the protective machinery of royal life. The palace once provided advisors, lawyers, communications experts, and crisis managers who could identify problems problems before they exploded. Outside that structure, every challenge becomes more exposed. Every controversy becomes more personal. Every mistake becomes harder to contain. And as the pressure continues building, one question hangs over everything like a dark cloud. Is this simply another difficult chapter for Prince Harry, or is this the moment when years of accumulating problems finally collide into the biggest crisis the Sussex brand has ever faced? Because right now, the answers remain hidden. The questions are multiplying, and the silence surrounding them is becoming louder by the day. What makes this entire situation even more explosive is that the controversy surrounding African Parks is no longer being discussed in isolation. The moment commentators began connecting it to Harry's other charitable ventures, the narrative changed completely. Suddenly, the conversation stopped being about one difficult problem and became about a pattern. And patterns are dangerous because they create a story people can easily understand. Critics have started asking whether every major organization connected to Harry somehow ends up facing turmoil, internal conflict, financial scrutiny, governance questions, or public controversy. Maybe that conclusion is unfair. Maybe it ignores important differences between each organization. But once a narrative takes hold, facts often struggle to catch up with perception, and perception is rapidly becoming Harry's biggest enemy. That phrase may sound dramatic, but it perfectly captures the mood spreading through sections of the media. African Parks faces human rights criticism. Sentabale has spent months trapped in public disputes and legal battles. Archewell has experienced operational challenges and endless scrutiny from critics. Invictus, perhaps Harry's most admired project, continues facing questions about costs, sponsorships, and future viability. Each controversy has its own facts and its own context. Yet together, they create something larger than the individual stories themselves. They create doubt, and once doubt enters the public conversation, every new headline becomes evidence supporting the larger theory. And that distinction matters, because the most serious question emerging from this crisis is not whether Harry personally caused these issues. The real question is whether he has developed a habit of reacting rather than leading. Again and again, critics point toward what they describe as a strategy of waiting for storms to pass instead of confronting them directly. They argue that public silence has become the default response, that statements arrive late, that explanations often feel incomplete, that controversies remain unresolved for too long. Whether that criticism is deserved is open to debate, but the perception itself is becoming increasingly difficult to escape. And perhaps that observation reveals the hidden heart of this entire story. When Harry left royal life, he gained freedom. Nobody disputes that. He escaped protocols, restrictions, and endless layers of palace control. But freedom came with a price. The institution that once protected him also disappeared. The advisors who quietly identified risks, the communications experts who managed crises before they became scandals, the lawyers who spotted governance issues, the officials who worried about reputational threats long before the public ever heard about them. All of that infrastructure remained behind. What looked like liberation from the outside may also have been the removal of an invisible safety net. Now the consequences are becoming impossible to ignore. Every controversy lands directly on Harry himself. Every criticism carries his name. Every organizational problem becomes a personal headline. The protective walls are gone, and without those walls, every weakness becomes visible. Meanwhile, the pressure surrounding African Parks continues building. Human rights organizations are not backing down. Journalists continue asking questions. Donors are watching developments carefully. Communities affected by the allegations continue demanding attention. And perhaps most significantly, the story refuses to disappear. News cycles normally move quickly. Scandals come and go. Public attention shifts elsewhere. Yet this controversy keeps returning. Every new allegation revives old questions. Every unanswered concern creates fresh headlines. Every attempt at containment seems to generate even greater curiosity. And that may be the most dangerous sign of all, because some controversies fade naturally. This one appears to be growing. What began as allegations surrounding one organization has evolved into a broader debate about celebrity charity governance, accountability, leadership, and responsibility. People are asking what public figures actually owe the organizations they represent. Are they merely symbolic ambassadors? Are they fundraising attractions? Or are they genuine stewards responsible for ensuring that organizations live up to their values? The answer to that question extends far beyond Harry. But right now, Harry finds himself standing directly in the center of it. The next few weeks could become crucial. A more direct response could alter the trajectory of this story. Visible engagement could change change perceptions. Concrete actions could restore confidence. But if the current strategy continues unchanged, critics believe the damage may become cumulative, not explosive, not immediate, just steady, relentless, gradually eroding the credibility that once made Harry one of the most influential charitable figures in the world. And that is why this may truly be the Sussex's biggest crisis yet. Not because of a single headline, not because of one allegation, but because multiple unresolved questions are converging at exactly the same moment. The pressure is building from every direction. The spotlight is getting brighter. The demands for answers are becoming louder. And with every passing day, the question hanging over Prince Harry grows more difficult to avoid. When history looks back on this moment, will it remember a leader who stepped forward when accountability was demanded, or a public figure who hoped the storm would simply pass? Right now, nobody knows the answer, but the clock is ticking, the scrutiny is intensifying, and the next chapter of this story may be even more dramatic than the last.